It's good, y'all. Welcome back to Niner Wire. I'm your host, Sam, and today we are back for the first off-season video on this channel. Hoping it will come a bit later, but hey, man, it is what it is. First video of the new year as well. And this one, we're just going to be looking back at the 2020 season. Obviously, a very rough season. So hopefully we'll bounce back next year. But anyways, we're here to focus on the 2020 season, give you one long recap of everything that went on. And for this, we got Jordan right here, man. What's good? I think you're muted too.
Yeah, what's going on, man?
It's good. Obviously been a rough season. Glad it's over, I guess you can say. Definitely a lot of highs and lows to the season. And we're going to break it down all here for you. We're going to go through every position, give some takeaways. It's going to be a pretty straightforward show, but let's get into it. Before we do, make sure to follow me on Twitter at NinerWireSam. My Instagram's at NinerWire_YT. And if you're watching on Twitter, make sure to subscribe to Niner Wire on YouTube. I post a lot of stuff there on all three platforms, so make sure to check those platforms out. Also, check out Jordan on Twitter at SplashCousin. It's under his name tag when you're watching the video as well, so make sure to check that out. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, make sure to leave that in the chat. And without further ado, let's get right into it. So, Jordan, I want to start off with you for this. And I know we have a lot of takeaways for this season. Is there one position you kind of want to start off with, or is there just one massive takeaway as a whole for the 49ers that you want to bring up real quick?
I mean, I think people are sick of hearing about. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, I think people are sick of hearing about quarterbacks. It's the most important position on the field. I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. I think that the most important takeaway from the season is that there is a clear culture that's been established where these guys are going to go out. There's depth top to bottom that may not be elite, but it's definitely an improvement from what we've seen in years past. I think the success they had in 2019 bred a sense of trust between the coaches and the players and the second unit. Long story short, I just think that most teams facing the adversity the 49ers face this year would probably be closer to 3-13, 4-12, given all their injuries, given how many games they played without their starter, the COVID protocols, moving out of state, all these things that happened. So I think there's definitely starting out on a positive. I think there are a lot of things that you can look at that are a positive takeaway. Looking at the culture that's kind of been bred and how, that Seattle game, for a second there, I thought when they were up 16-6, I'm like, man, maybe they'll hold on. I didn't feel great about it. Russell Wilson, but that and the Arizona game, they didn't just pack it in. And we all saw on national TV. I'm not gonna lie, I was watching the Warriors game. I was watching Steph go crazy, but I was keeping up with the Eagles basically throwing out a backup QB for nobody really knows why, but we can all assume it was to get a better draft pick. I don't think the 49ers purposely went out trying to lose, and I think that does breed a culture and a sense of success. So I think the fact they didn't give up is my biggest takeaway, because they could have easily packed it in. By week 11 or 12, even though there was still a mathematical possibility, the team's not dumb. They knew it was they knew they weren't going to make the playoffs. They knew it was an uphill battle.
Yeah,
they probably weren't going to climb. But I never saw them give up, and I saw them fighting week in and week out. And I think that's, to me, that is the biggest takeaway, is that there should be a great sense of pride amongst the team and the fans who support the team, that until the end they kept fighting. And for what it's worth, I know a lot of us probably would have felt better if it was the Seahawks and not the Cardinals, being kept from the playoffs. It really kept the Cardinals from the playoffs, that's something to hang your head on. It's a division rival. It's a team that's given you issues the past couple of years, and you ultimately went out there and played when you could have easily packed it in and just started playing for next year. We all know players don't tank, but teams, as we saw with the Eagles, teams certainly do. So I think the fact that they never really just packed it in, to me, is the biggest takeaway this year. There should be a great sense of pride about not just kind of coasting to the finish these last few weeks, especially once they were mathematically eliminated after that Dallas game.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm totally with you on that, man. I mean, this is why I kept saying throughout the entire year, I know there's a lot of people who are like, why can't we lose or everything? And I kept telling people, these guys, as Herm Edwards said, you play to win the game. There's guys out there that are trying to get incentives, that are trying to get paid for this year, next year, for their future. There's coaches that are trying to get jobs. You look at Robert Saleh, DeMeco Ryans could be the defensive coordinator now. Peters could be the GM in Carolina. We don't know what's going on, man. But everyone on that team is going to try to win the game. And there is one mission in every NFL team, and that is to win a Super Bowl. How do you do that? By winning games. So, I mean, even though they were out of the playoffs, I mean, this team definitely shows a lot of, like, there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff for this team that I just loved to see this year. And I mean, 6-10 with that many injuries. I mean, I think literally every one of our key players went down. I think every starter besides McGlinchey and Tomlinson missed a game, at least one game this season, that's kind of crazy to think. And I mean, yeah, it's just crazy how unfortunate this team was this year with all the injuries and how their luck was so bad. But to go 6-10, put in the heart and be set up for a prime draft position, even though it's not a Super Bowl, which I was hoping, which I predicted to happen, it's all good. And I definitely think that this team's going to have a lot of learning experience from this. I know Lynch said we're going to look at injuries a little bit more, how to handle them better, because, I mean, this team has had an injury past. But, I mean, this team, I definitely can say when this team's healthy, they're definitely a Super Bowl contender. And it definitely shows by those supporting guys stepping up this year when they had to. So, yeah, for sure. And you talk about the division. 3-3 in the division ain't that bad. A sweep against the Rams, even considering the circumstances this year, a sweep against the Rams is pretty damn good. You win one game in Arizona, which I thought we had no shot at winning before the season even started, man. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot to go with it. If there's one negative takeaway, just overall as the team, 1-7 at home. I know we played a few games in Arizona, but that can't happen. 1-7 at home. That no team succeeds with that. And obviously you saw that with us going 6-10. And I mean, one win at home. That I can't state enough how bad that is for a team. So that's my negative takeaway. So yeah, for sure. All right, let's get into some of the positions and let's just go down the line. I know, Jordan, you started off with quarterback. And obviously, I think my biggest takeaway is, it's not my biggest takeaway, but there's going to be a lot of talk this offseason about quarterback, whether Garoppolo's coming back and whether we get a new quarterback, whether we trade one, draft one, you name it. My biggest takeaway for quarterback, I got to say, if Shanahan does not trust Jimmy Garoppolo one bit, it's time to move on. And reason being, I mean, you saw a lot this year of Kyle Shanahan on the sidelines just throwing his hands up, like, what are you doing? And I know they blamed on the injury a lot, but I'm a bit conflicted if that was actually the case. And I know they said, like, oh, Jimmy Garoppolo is coming back, but he's still with the team. He is still the quarterback for the team. And you're not really going to say that even a day after the season ends or during the season. If you say that during the season, you're kind of screwed on that part. But if Shanahan doesn't trust Jimmy Garoppolo one bit, in my opinion, it is time to move on because this team is in a win now mode. And if you can't trust your quarterback, there's no point in doing it. I'm trying to think who's a good example. There's definitely some good examples out there. The Jacksonville Jaguars of 2017. I mean, Blake Bortles just did not pan out there, and that's why they didn't make the Super Bowl. They kept him there. I mean, they trusted him, but by keeping him there, they just destroyed that team. And look what they are 3 years later, getting a new quarterback, first overall in the draft. So that is my biggest takeaway for the quarterback position this year.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern, honestly, is availability, first of all, because you can go back and forth about the productivity when they're actually playing. Anybody who's followed me on Twitter, they know how I feel. I think, Jimmy's I'm somewhere between 17 to 22 in that range of quarterbacks. When he's healthy, that's where I put him. Him not being there certainly affects my opinion even more so. I don't think he's, just terrible, but I think that
no, he's not terrible.
Yeah, he's far too reliant on the scheme. Last in 2019, that year that everybody likes to talk about because they went to the Super Bowl and he posted, kind of old school statistics that look nice when you look at yardage and touchdowns and yards per attempt and all that stuff. I like diving into a little bit more of the advanced stuff. And expected points added per play is one of my favorite ones. You can break down play action, you can break down with or without, you can break down dropbacks. My issue with Jimmy has always been when he has to drop back and a team knows he's going to throw, and generally that's when you're trailing, that's when you're in third and long, when you're in these high leverage situations. I haven't felt like he's been great. And I know a lot of people like to cite, well, they were really good on third down last year. Well, yeah, they were really good on third down because on first and second down, they had one of the highest efficiency rates in the league, and they were having third and short on a consistent basis. But when it was third and long, I watched enough tape, and I remember watching enough games where there was a clear issue, and he wasn't beating teams with his arms. And if you look at the numbers, he was dead last among starting quarterbacks in expected points added per play on dropbacks, which is not good. Like, you know, you can't take numbers purely as gospel. You need to use your own eyes and form an opinion based on that. But when I take what I believe is my opinion, that he isn't very good on straight dropbacks when you take a large sample size. He's obviously made plays here and there. I know there's the people like talking about the 3rd and 16 from the Rams game and plays like that. But the large sample size, he wasn't very good. So I think within the structure of Kyle's offense, yeah, you can look good and you can put up good numbers when the run game's cooking, the play action's opened up, the middle of the field's there. But as we saw this year, his team got more and more tape on him. The Chiefs, starting with the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, when they take away the middle of the field, you kind of start to see that there's this disconnect between this Jimmy we saw that everybody loved last year, that looked great, that looked like the Niners were going to just coast, not to say coast, but we're going to kind of get to the Super Bowl and win. Their offense was scoring 30 points a game, and he was for the most part was doing his part. There's a huge difference between that and then the Jimmy that's asked to throw outside the numbers consistently, throw when they're trailing. And for me, I would like to see Kyle Shanahan get a quarterback that he can go to a press conference and not say, I expect this guy to be my quarterback. I want him to get a quarterback that he says, this is my guy. This is the quarterback going forward. Stop asking me questions. And that's the biggest thing standing out to me now is I think the 49ers are doing a tremendous job positioning themselves. Because, again, much as I truly wish to move on from Jimmy because I don't think he is worth the money he is making. Again, people always say he's like 13th to 15th or something, somewhere in that range for quarterbacks. That's great. I don't think his skill is anywhere between 13 to 15. I think it's closer to that 20th mark. I just can't, like I said, and I see somebody saying now, he's more 12 to 17. Again, if you look at his numbers when there's the play action and the run game's working, he looks great. If you look at his numbers when he's just a pure drop back passer and he's forced to throw the ball on 5 and 7 step drops, he's dead last in the league. He's 32nd in the league among starting quarterbacks. And for a position that asks you to throw the football, like, you have to be better when other teams, like, think about the division the 49ers are in. Goff has been awful this year, so he's kind of in that same tier, Jimmy, in my opinion. But Kyler and Russ, how consistently are these guys getting in situations where it is 3rd and long?
They're balling out every week, man.
Yeah, or even if there's nothing open, they can scramble, they can move with their legs. I understand Jimmy's a bit compromised because of the ACL. His leg's hurting. His leg isn't the same as it was before. He obviously had an ankle this year, so he definitely wasn't as mobile as he may have been last year. But again, my biggest thing is that there's clearly a disconnect between himself and Kyle Shanahan. You don't say the things you say. You don't entertain these type of questions if you have any doubts about your quarterback. Like, I can promise you, Pete Carroll isn't taking questions. And I know people say there's not Russell Wilson's and Patrick Mahomes growing on trees, but you don't, I'll give you a perfect example. Like the Titans, Mike Vrabel isn't taking questions about Ryan Tannehill being his quarterback. Like, Sean McVay isn't taking questions about who's going to be his quarterback going forward. Like, it's not something that teams that don't have a realistic path to moving on and there's a chance of it happening even entertain. And the 49ers have been entertaining it for days. I know everybody today probably saw the stuff from the press conference and the exit pressers and stuff today. But what it ultimately comes down to for me is that the guy, you can debate where he is, somewhere in that middle of the pack when he plays, but he's missed, I think it's 23 games now in the last 3 years. It could be more.
Something like that, yeah. I mean, he missed what? 4? He missed
this year and 13
in 2018.
Yeah,
he missed 13, 2018, and then this year you just said
there were 2 games this year that he left before the game ended because of injury. And at a certain point, like, it comes back to your best ability is availability. So if he can't stay on the field, if he could stay on the field and he cost $12 million, $13 million instead of 26, I'd probably be a lot more open to him coming back. But he doesn't. And I also think that it would be a mistake to restructure and spread out the flexibility they have to move on from him, because this year, if they were to cut him, the dead cap's only $2.8 million.
So I don't know. I don't think you can restructure that contract anymore.
You could, but it would be a terrible idea in my opinion.
It would be a bad idea because then it's probably ended up with him getting more money, or it's either going to be him getting more money or us getting upset. I mean, you might as well just cut him or do nothing about it if you want him as your quarterback.
It ruins the flexibility that they have as a team, which is something that they've done a tremendous job doing. It's not as glamorous as a position, and he hasn't played, so it hasn't really been talked about as much. But the 49ers opened up, I think it was like $10 million in cap space a week before the season started. They restructured Dee Ford. We all know Dee Ford hasn't been able to play. He's unfortunately been dealing with some neck and some back injuries and some serious stuff that, John Lynch said today. he can't commit to him playing 9 months from now. So it's obviously some serious stuff. So I'm not trying to say, nobody could really have seen it coming. Although injured, it was more than the knees where he had the tendonitis. He had the hamstring problem last year. But they restructured Dee Ford's contract, and Dee Ford, they had an out for his deal, whereas before they could have cut him for a very minimal cap hit. Now, because of that restructure that they did, they would be forced to eat, I believe it's $14 million in dead cap if they were to cut him. And if he comes back, he's still making $20 million this year. So they basically tried to free up some space, which we can't really fault them for as fans. They felt like they had a Super Bowl roster. They were just in the Super Bowl not even 12 months ago. They tried to free up some space to get this team back to where they thought they could be. And, it just was it was a season nobody really could have predicted. There were injuries all over the place. The performances may not have been as good as people, expected, the front office included. But I just think that having that flexibility is so important. And again, I'm trying to be as objective as possible because I fully concede my own opinion. I don't want Jimmy to come back, but just looking at it from an objective lens, I think that ultimately what it comes down to is that the 49ers know that they're capable of winning games with him. You can't say that we watched that the backups come in and we thought that one. There's some starters in the league that can't get it done too. It's not a given that you have a quarterback that can win games. So I don't think that the 49ers have lost sight of that, but I also think that they've definitely left the door open to upgrading, as they've said multiple times. We all know that they checked in on Tom Brady last year, right after the Super Bowl. How many teams that are, within 7 minutes of winning the Super Bowl look to move on from a quarterback that's, supposedly just hitting their prime? And
you never see that.
It doesn't happen. So it's very telling to me. I just think that they've done a tremendous job positioning themselves to where if they do find an upgrade, they can cut ties with Jimmy. Maybe they trade him to another team, for me, teams to watch out for. I know everybody says New England, but I'd watch out for Chicago.
Chicago, definitely.
Maybe Indianapolis. I don't know if they would go for it. Maybe Indianapolis. But that's something to keep an eye on. And then they could obviously upgrade. Or on the flip side, if they don't find somebody that's worth upgrading or trading up in the draft is at a cost that they're not willing to pay as a team, then they can always just bring Jimmy back. They still have the same flexibility next year, and they can always fall back on. Look at our comments from January and December where we said we expected him to come back and we said he was the guy. So they've done a pretty good job, I call it like fence sitting. They're kind of just sitting there.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that.
So we're not going to know for weeks. It's hard not to talk about because it's the most important position in sports, not just football, in my opinion. Quarterback is just on a completely different tier. So it's hard to avoid the questions about it and, speculation, but I know the fan base as a whole is getting kind of sick of it. So I hope we do get answers relatively soon, but I just think it's at a point where it would be nice to see how dynamic this offense could be with somebody who has better physical tools.
And who can use the offense a bit better in the way Shanahan wants it, because I think that's why I say Shanahan has no trust in him, is because, this season you saw there's routes where I think this applies with more Mullins and Beathard, but the offense definitely adjusts depending on who the quarterback is. And the fact that there was no trust with Garoppolo, or little trust from what we saw on the field, it seems like Kyle Shanahan has plays just waiting in the archives, just waiting to be pulled out of the hat and used with a guy who can do everything he wants, whether it be someone in the draft or someone that we trade or sign in free agency, someone like that. He is just waiting to unload everything. And I think that's another thing I'll let you talk in a minute, but that's another thing with the flexibility with Garoppolo. Not only is Garoppolo could be off the blocks for the 49ers, Mullins and Beathard, both free agents. So they both could be gone as well. You can bring in a new quarterback room. Maybe you keep Josh Rosen as your backup, something like that. Maybe draft a guy later in the rounds if you want a third string or something, or even sign a guy who can back up. Maybe a guy like Tyrod Taylor or someone like that. I don't know. Just throwing a name out there of a guy who's a free agent. But the flexibility it just goes to show how crucial this offseason is for the Niners. You're 1 year removed from a Super Bowl. You were just riddled by injuries. There's a massive quarterback controversy. You can't collapse like a team like the Jaguars did. I'm gonna keep bringing them up because it's a prime example of a team who had a stellar team all around, and because of I wouldn't say because of one player, but their quarterback play really drove them down and dug them in a deep hole that they haven't been able to get out of. So this is a crucial offseason, and you got to use that flexibility to the best of your advantage. whether you want Garoppolo and you want to keep the same quarterback room, or will you want to just like restart at quarterback, do something else, get a new guy who knows the system. So flexibility, it's going to be very interesting to see how they use this offseason, but there is a lot of flexibility for the 49ers at quarterback, and specifically quarterback. I know there's a lot of other positions, but quarterback in particular, considering that is the most important position, as you said, in sports. So yeah, for sure. All right, let's move to the running backs. And I know we talked a lot about quarterback. I don't have as much to say for the other positions, but I'm just going to reiterate a few points that I made at the beginning of the season. One point is that, as I said before, at the beginning of the season, Shanahan can work with any running back that he wants. I mean, you saw it with Raheem Mostert. When Raheem Mostert was healthy, he was balling out, especially in those first two games. And I definitely think the lack of Kittle definitely hurt this run game as well. And that's another point that I'll make, that George Kittle, X factor of this run game, in my opinion. George Kittle is, I mean, when he is on the field, this run game is so much better with him. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just going to throw that out there. But after Mostert went down, you saw Jeff Wilson step in. You saw JaMychal Hasty step in. Heck, even Jerick McKinnon, who's usually a satellite back, stepped in a few of those games. Now, I don't know if we're going to bring him back or anything or use him anymore, but it's definitely just goes to show that Shanahan can work with any running back he wants. And that's why I'm never really concerned about who's playing running back next year. Because, I mean, you got guys like Jeff Wilson. You can bring him back. You can bring Mostert back. You can bring any of those guys back. And any of those guys, I would say Tevin Coleman's really the only guy I wouldn't bring back to be our RB1. But you can just sign a guy just like RB2 off the streets. I don't know if there's any good examples I can name off the top of my head, or just draft a guy in the 7th round, and they can be a starting running back, in my opinion, with Kyle Shanahan. So that's one of my running back takes. And speaking of Jeff Wilson, which I just mentioned, Jeff Wilson, if they keep Wilson or Mostert, Jeff Wilson is the RB1 for this team. I definitely think he was performing a bit better without Kittle than Mostert was. Obviously, you saw a lot of the injuries that Mostert had, so we'll have to figure it out. But I definitely think Wilson, if there's a competition next year in training camp for that RB1 spot, I think Jeff Wilson meets Shanahan's criteria a bit more. I also think this could help. Maybe you put Mostert back on special teams, help him out. I mean, he was so good at being a gunner for this team a few years back. So maybe you move him back there, give Wilson an expanded role. We'll see what happens. But I definitely think that Jeff Wilson could be the RB1 next year. And that's why those are my 3 big takeaways for the running back position.
Yeah. Again, I don't know, anybody who follows me, they might have seen. I really think that running back is the most overvalued position in the sport. I think that it's
absolutely, without a doubt.
And, people can misconstrue that, because there's obviously a huge difference between running, a hobbled Jerick McKinnon, who clearly is not the same Jerick McKinnon he was before, suffering back-to-back knee injuries in subsequent years, and somebody like Raheem Mostert when he's healthy. He's averaging 6 yards a carry, and he's hitting the hole, and he's just accelerating at a very high rate. But generally speaking, the running backs have the shortest shelf life among all the skill positions. They generally have about a 2 to 3 year window where they're really playing at a consistently high level. There's obviously exceptions to the rule. It's not a definitive statement. But for me, it's not worth paying guys. It's not worth spending high draft capital on. I know a lot of people watching Harris from Alabama, who's an Antioch
Travis
guy.
Etienne too, yeah.
Bay Area guy, Travis Etienne. These guys where you start to think, man, they'd look really good with Shanahan and with this outside zone. But to me, there's a little bit more nuance to it than just Kyle can make undrafted guys look good. It's more so the system's so reliant on the zone blocking and the offensive line doing their job that any running back that is half decent can find those holes and can hit them. No disrespect to Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson was undrafted, and he was undrafted for a reason. But you put him in Kyle Shanahan's offense, and all of a sudden, here's this guy scoring 10 touchdowns, leading the team in rushing. And I just think that it's far more beneficial to have constant turnover at that position rather than you look at a team like the Cowboys who had, Ezekiel Elliott, they spent, I believe it was the 4th pick in 2016 on him. Way overdrafted, in my opinion. You don't take running backs that high. He had a good couple seasons behind a good O-line, but as we saw this year, the second the O-line started to go down,
he's I mean, he's toast.
Exactly, and he's making $15 million a year, and I don't know the guarantees on his deal. He signed a 4-year, $80 million deal, so make five. I think it was five, something like that. 5 or 6 year.
Yeah.
No, I think it was 6 for 90. I don't remember the specifics, but I know he was making 15.
It was some ridiculous contract that it was a massive overpay.
And now the Cowboys are having, an internal struggle about whether or not to pay Dak Prescott, who, in my opinion, is a bona fide top 10 quarterback at the most important position again in sports. Excuse me, when they didn't hesitate to sign a running back to that big of a deal. Obviously, there's nobody on the 49ers that's commanding that kind of money anytime soon. I don't see them signing a running back in free agency to any kind of extravagant deal. I think they probably learned a mistake from McKinnon, as much as they may have had a role mapped out for him. Again, the position's so volatile with the amount of punishment they take, the amount of injuries that happen, and again, that short shelf life. So I think in terms of running back, just keep looking through undrafted free agents. If they take a guy, for me, the earliest you should take a running back in the draft, this is just my personal philosophy, is the very end of the third round, maybe the middle, if there's a guy transcendent talent. Like, look at the Saints where they took Alvin Kamara and the production they've gotten out of Kamara. I'm totally for it. Then the issue becomes I wouldn't give him the big second contract. The Saints decided to. And I do realize how important he is to their offense. But again, those are deals that hurt on the back end. But if you took just the 4 years of production they got from Kamara out of that third round draft slot, that's a win every time in my book. And you take a player like, a Leonard Fournette. Fournette was drafted
4th overall.
Yeah, 4th overall.
Which is ridiculous considering how he's been playing.
Exactly. And Kamara got picked, I think, like 67th or 68th in that same draft. And again,
that draft was ridiculous. First guy off the board is one of the worst guys in that. Not the worst guy in that draft, but I mean, when you look at the other guys, he's in the middle of the pack. And that's also, you were talking about like running backs, like that massive contract. This is exactly why running backs, you see all the running backs hold out. And it's really only running backs that hold out because they're the ones that say, oh, running back is a valuable position when not that many teams value it. So yeah, for sure. But continue what you were saying.
So to me, the most important positions you're going to want to pay, and this kind of, I don't know if this is something we're going to segue into anyway, as quarterback comes number one. Getting a quarterback, like I said, I can't stress how important it is to find the guy that you want, and you end up paying that guy. There's obviously tremendous success if you look at guys on rookie deals because that provides teams tremendous financial flexibility to fill out the rest of their roster. But there also is precedent that we'll see moving forward where you get these guys on mega deals where they are going to have tremendous success. You look at Aaron Rodgers, you look at Russell Wilson, you look at these guys that are making a good deal of money. Tannehill, Josh Allen. I believe Josh Allen's due for a contract extension coming up.
Oh, absolutely, quick. Yeah.
So he's obviously not there yet. He's still on that rookie deal. But some of these players like that, they're perennial playoff teams. And we all know the old saying, if you can get into the dance, you never know what's going to happen. That's the playoffs in any sport, but particularly the NFL. So when you get a good quarterback like that, you pay them, you retain them. And then second for me is the blind side, which generally is a left tackle. If it's somebody like Tua or Michael Vick, lefty, you focus more on that right tackle position. But when you get that left tackle, that blind side shored up, you're protecting your investment that you made at quarterback. And as much as we can point at all the things he got wrong and how it hurts now because the Texans are losing that number 3 pick in this upcoming draft. Bill O'Brien made a point to go out and get a young left tackle in Laramie Tunsil and secure the blind side for Deshaun Watson. So, again, it may not be, now it seems bad because that pick ended up falling much higher than I think they could have guessed. I think they thought they would be picking more towards 20, 25, somewhere in that range. But I don't have an issue with it because that left tackle position is so important. So, for me, the 49ers, ultimate they need to figure out the quarterback position first and foremost. Whatever they're going to do, if they can look to upgrade, great. If not, they'll figure it out. But regardless of who they end up getting at quarterback, whether it's Jimmy or somebody they replace him with, Trent Williams needs to be the first and foremost priority.
Most important. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we were all saying it last year with Kittle, and we were all getting so annoyed about how Kittle, it just kept getting pushed back, everything. I think Trent Williams, I'm not going to say like, throw all your money at him, but that is the number one guy, hands down. And I think that's something that really all fans can agree with. I mean, you look at our free agents, and he's really the guy that stands out. I mean, you got Kittle paid. You got a lot of other guys paid. Now it's really about Trent Williams and locking him up and securing him. And that was one of the things, I mean, in that trade, remember, he declined the trade to go to Minnesota because of that extension. Now he proves himself. He's going to want a lot this year. So, I mean, we're going to have to see what happens. But Trent Williams, you can't have first of all, you need that blindside tackle, as you were saying. Second of all, considering the way McGlinchey's been playing, you can't have two tackles that have massive question marks on them. You need have a guy who's secure as hell, ready to go right away. Because I'm just going to say right now, I'm not trying to trade up for Penei Sewell in the draft. I would rather trade up for a quarterback or something like that. Get a guy who can secure the blind side right there. So, yeah, you have to lock up Trent Williams, and it's hands down the most important player in this on this team that is an impending free agent. So, and again, kind of with like we were talking about running backs as well. I mean, I wouldn't say he opens up the run game as much as a guy like Mike McGlinchey does, but still, I mean, you need protection to open up the run game, and he does that day in, day out. One of the best tackles in the league right there. You have to lock him up if you're the San Francisco 49ers. So, and when we were going to the offensive line, I guess this is a perfect segue to it. As I kind of said, this is kind of self-explanatory as basing off of what I said. But in my opinion, offensive line is the biggest need on this team, not quarterback. And the reason being is because we have Garoppolo, who, in my opinion, is still a startable quarterback. He's definitely a startable quarterback. It's just a matter of fact, does Kyle Shanahan trust him or not? I'm thinking no, but right now I think offensive line, that's something that has to get fixed. Number 1 or 2 priority on this team. But I will say one thing about this offensive line, big question mark that was going into this year. Will Weston Richburg play? Obviously, he didn't. I will say I do believe that Ben Garland can be a starting center for this team if the team wants him to be that way. I think you can have a lot of flexibility. That's really been the theme of this episode. There's a lot of flexibility for this team at the quarterback position and the offensive line as well, because, I mean, you got a guy like Brunskill, which we'll talk about a little bit. But Ben Garland at center, I mean, every time he's been on the field, he's done a pretty decent job, in my opinion. I definitely think he is a startable center because, let's be real, there's not that many centers you're going to find elsewhere that you can get for a cheap price like Ben Garland's contract is, or just put up the quality of Ben Garland that he does. So I definitely think he can be a starting center in this league. But now let's talk about Brunskill. And I definitely think that right guard is the biggest question on this offensive line. And do you want to keep Daniel Brunskill there, or do you want to maybe flip-flop him with McGlinchey, move McGlinchey to right guard, put Brunskill at right tackle, or do you just draft a new guy, have Brunskill come off the bench if needed? It's definitely going to be very interesting to see what they do with him this year. It was very interesting to see what they did with him last year because I thought they were for sure draft a new right guard, but obviously they didn't. So it'll be very interesting to see what the situation with Daniel Brunskill is, what they do with him. Do they play him at right guard? Do they play him at right tackle? Do they keep him at center, which I really don't want to happen. I would much rather have Ben Garland at center than Daniel Brunskill, but we'll see what happens. But Daniel Brunskill is going to be one of the biggest question marks of this offseason. Same with Mike McGlinchey. Do we extend the 5th-year option? My guess is no, but I mean, obviously, Mike McGlinchey, I'm just going to say right now, I know we talk a lot of shit about him on Twitter and everything. Everyone does. The run blocking is there. Let's be real. A lot of people are just forgetting about that. He was, I mean, in my opinion, he could be one of the best run blocking tackles in this league. But pass blocking, I mean, that's a whole different story. We don't even need to talk about that. So, yeah, those are my biggest offensive line takeaways. What you got, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start with that. Mike McGlinchey gets way, way, way more hate than he should because people post highlights all the time. There's lowlights too in any sport, and his lowlights look really bad. He ends up on his back. He's getting bullied around by guys that are smaller than him. He's getting guys that are just blowing right past him. His lowlights don't look good. I'm fine with admitting that. I watch plenty of tape and I see it myself. But what happens is people that don't go through every play and aren't watching the tape on every down are missing that. They see this one bad play he had, but they're not seeing the 10 good plays in between. They're not seeing the pancake block he's laying down to open up a running lane. They're not seeing him get to the level and take out a linebacker on a sweep outside.
And this is what social media does to people. They just only look at one side, which does piss me off about McGlinchey a little bit. So, yeah.
McGlinchey is here to stay, and I hope people get comfortable with it because he's going to get his 5th-year option, and he's probably going to get an extension after that too because the guy is a hell of a run blocker. And the problem I have with people criticizing McGlinchey is this was always his issue coming out of Notre Dame. I'm usually against drafting interior offensive linemen high in the draft just because of the abundance of them. And
but Quentin Nelson, are you going there?
Yeah, Quentin Nelson was a one-of-a-kind talent. I personally really wanted Quentin Nelson. I didn't think he would fall to the 49ers or they were picking, and sure enough, Indianapolis grabbed him. But I was okay with McGlinchey. But if you go back and you watch him at Notre Dame, he's the same guy. He was a phenomenal run blocker, so-so pass blocker, so-so in pass protection. And I think that Kyle was well aware of that when he picked him. He's still well aware of it today. The biggest issue is that fans want to blame somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who's a fan. We all want to point the blame at somebody. And McGlinchey has been a punching bag because when you're getting thrown around by defensive backs and linebackers who are half your size and you're getting beat time and time again by the opposing defensive end, whoever you're going up against, it makes it very easy to put a target on your back. But I think that he has been much better than people may see just from the clips they're watching where people are singling it out. I can do that with any position. I can pull up Game Pass and I can pull up bad plays from any position and only post those. And it's difficult if you're not going in to do the research to see the good stuff a player does. So I think McGlinchey definitely gets way too much heat. I think he didn't help when he did his, still here thing. That was kind of stupid because when you do stuff like that, it's like, I don't know if you've seen like Chase Claypool when the Steelers were like 8-0, he posted something like, "Oh, losing, never heard of her," and then they lost 3 in a row.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the only thing that I got posted about Chase Claypool for the next 5 weeks.
You invite that criticism into your life when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
So just like anything else in life, there's a cost to it. I think the right side was certainly more of a concern. Laken Tomlinson on the left side wasn't as good as he was last year, but he played all 16 games.
Serviceable guard, yeah. I'll say that right now. He was a serviceable guard.
Yeah, he's missed 1 game in 4 years since he's been here. And again, for me, availability is the best ability. I think there is a problem fundamentally at the center position since Richburg suffered that injury in New Orleans last year. He hasn't been able to come back since. I think it definitely did cost them big time in the Super Bowl due to the Chiefs having I think there's 3 interior defense. There's Aaron Donald in his own tier, and then there's Buckner and Chris Jones, and then everybody else. I was going to say there's 3 in the same, but it's not fair to Aaron Donald. He's far and away.
Yeah, Aaron Donald's a whole different tier above everyone else.
But I would put Chris Jones in the same tier as DeForest Buckner, and probably just those
definitely.
And they exploited that, and I think that that's definitely a position the 49ers need to look at. Is that something you address in the first round? No, I don't think so. I'm really against it. We just saw Washington extend their center, the football team, who's 199th pick overall. Are you going to hit always in the 7th round? No, but it's foolish to spend first-round picks on interior linemen, in my opinion. I don't know. We have some time getting into the draft, but there are probably a dozen at least, maybe 15 between guards and centers, players that I would have on the top 100 of my draft board that I've seen on the top 100 of various outlets and various respect for. So it's not a position you need to reach for. You can wait till the 2nd and 3rd round and find a guy who is.
And not to mention, by the way, looking at this draft, I mean, I'll let you finish, but looking at this draft, a lot of guys that are listed as tackle can play guard or even center. I mean, I haven't seen it, but guys like Alex Leatherwood, Rashawn Slater, Elijah Vera Tucker, all have experience at guard. I definitely think, I mean, those are all first-round guys. I mean, who knows all the guys that are later in the draft. So there are a lot of guys who can be very versatile, playing all around the place, whether it's tackle, guard, and maybe that's where their sweet spot is. I mean, maybe they draft a tackle somewhere around 3, move them to guard immediately, and that's a sweet spot, something like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very versatile, deep and versatile draft class at the offensive line, but continue.
Yeah, so basically just for me, there'll be some options in free agency. Right guard, I know Kyle seems to really like Brunskill. Maybe they give him another chance. I think that with the weird offseason we had, it was tough for every position, but I know Brunskill, because of the injuries at center, was splitting reps at center and right guard. He never really got locked into one position, which is way more important than people think. I don't think people understand how difficult it is to go from being center to being a right guard and back and forth and splitting reps there. So maybe he feels comfortable, but they're going to need to figure something out. There again, though, it's not the offensive line is nowhere near as bad as people have made it out to be, in my opinion. It obviously has had its issues, but part of having a good offensive line.
It's still a massive concern, I would say, though.
Part of the good offensive line, like the Packers have had one of the best offensive lines in football. But the talent at the quarterback position matters. If you took any of the 3 quarterbacks in the 49ers quarterback room currently and you put them on that same Packers team and they played the entire length of the season, are any of them having the same success Aaron Rodgers had? No. I can say that.
Nope.
I can say that definitively. It's a hypothetical, so I'm not 100% certain, obviously. But the quarterback talent does matter behind the line. No matter how good the line is, you still need good play from the quarterback. Will it help an average quarterback look better? Totally. I'm totally conceding that. But I would much rather invest in a position like a good quarterback is. A quarterback kind of is what they are, but a good quarterback can hide a bad offensive line. And if you don't believe me, watch any Seahawks game from the last 6-7 years and see how much Russell Wilson has had to scramble for his life and run around. Watch Kyler Murray the year before in Arizona when they had a terrible offensive line in 2019. They were still giving teams fits because he was able to escape the pocket. He was able to use his mobility to wreak havoc.
And that's why we struggle so much against guys like those.
And that to me is if it was 15 years ago, 10 years ago, probably wouldn't have mattered as much. But the way the NFL is moving and the way offensive line play is devolving, if you watch college ball, I'm not an expert, obviously. I'm not a scout, but I do watch my fair share of college ball. And it's very clear there is a decline in offensive line play. And the offensive line play hasn't been as good the past, let's say, 5 to 6 years as it was the 10 to 15 before it. And the defensive line play is getting much better. And these guys on defense, because it's humans, we evolve. Athletes are no different. Sports are no different. So defenses are tending to evolve. They're faster. They're quicker, which is why you see a guy like 10 years ago, no offense to Fred Warner. Fred Warner probably isn't getting looked at in the 3rd round because he was a little bit undersized. He may not have been as big. They wanted these big, strong linebackers patrolling the middle. But the 49ers recognize this trend where teams are throwing more and you're going to need more speed. So you get a guy like Fred Warner who's basically – I don't want to say he's a hybrid because he's not quite a defensive back, but he has the IQ of somebody that can patrol that middle of the field with the same speed of a defensive back, which is why you see him have such a high coverage grade and he has such a high IQ. So I think that it's so imperative that the 49ers take a look around the league, which I think Kyle does a tremendous job of. He's talked about it numerous times. He's spoken about how much, he used to watch the Patriots when Brady was there. He probably still does to see what Belichick and McDaniels are doing. I know he takes some of the concepts from Gruden, some of the older stuff he was doing. So I know he's paying attention around the league, but my hope is that they see the mold that the league is kind of shifting to, where having that speed is so important because athletes are getting better every year. And it's clear now too, like we saw, I hate to say, I don't want to bring up bad memories for people, but we saw in the Super Bowl, the 49ers had one of the best D-lines I've ever seen, but it didn't matter because Casey was holding them and the refs weren't going to call holding because it's the Super Bowl. They want points. They want revenue. They don't want, a just crazy shootout every weekend, but they definitely are favoring offenses more. We see the same thing. I don't know if people saw the roughing the passer call they called on, I forget who it was, on the Lions when they tackled Kirk Cousins.
It was Trey Flowers.
It wasn't roughing the passer at all, but because these new rules are tended to be geared more towards the quarterback, having a guy like that can escape, that's going to cause fits for the defense, you're going to get more hands to the face calls, you're going to get more roughing, you're going to get more penalties generated because people get frustrated chasing them. So it's kind of at the point where it's like it's very simple, but it's it's easier said than done. But my philosophy is basically like, if you can't beat them, join them. And after watching that Super Bowl and watching how good that D-line was, because 10 years ago that strategy would have been fine. That would have been a pocket quarterback. Like if the 49ers played the 2011 Patriots and it was Tom Brady stuck in the pocket going up against Nick Bosa and Buckner coming down and Armstead running, wreaking havoc with them dropping 7, 49ers win that game easily in my opinion. But because buy time and he has that big arm, and then you couple it with the fact that they're not going to call holding, because I don't think people are, I know it's easy for us to get upset. I'm still upset about it, seeing the hold on Bosa and stuff, but they didn't call a hold on the 49ers offensive line all night. And there was a few instances where I can say confidently there were people on the 49ers line who were holding too, and they didn't call it. And that's the biggest game of the year. If they're not going to call holding in the Super Bowl, they're likely not going to call it consistently throughout the rest of the year. So you're better off getting a guy that can take advantage of this shift that we're seeing, where they're kind of coddling quarterbacks and they're gearing things more towards the offense, which is why, and again, it's a complete unknown. So I get it. Like there's a quarterback that they've had success with and people are attached to. I understand. But if you just remove the name and you remove, the memories and you look purely at the physical skills, I would much rather have a Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, a Justin Fields, who can use their legs, who's an athlete, who can push the pocket, who can throw the ball deep downfield, who's going to keep a defense spread out because they can't load the box, versus somebody like a Jimmy who's, very deadly accurate when he's on between the numbers. He's very good throwing off the play action. I think his mental acumen pre-snap is better than it is when he's actually seeing live action. But I do want to give him credit for that. So I in that mold that has that mobility. And again, when I say mobile, people tend to just like jump to like Michael Vick and like Lamar Jackson and these guys. Those guys are freaks of nature that are generational talents that, on a side note, enjoy watching them while you can because they don't come around very often. Michael Vick's one of my favorite athletes ever for his play on the field. Watching him in a Falcons uniform, I know that he had the off the field stuff. I'm not touching on, it's not what I'm trying to get. I'm just saying purely on the field, his on-field play. That was electric, man. That's not what I'm asking. You can't expect a guy to just go 60 yards, rush for 1,000 and throw for 3,500 that's not realistic. But what you can expect is a guy like a Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow wasn't crazy accurate or crazy mobile, but if you watch him and you watched him early on, the Bengals line was terrible. And he had a lot of plays where he was moving the pocket. He was able to extend and buy time. He was able to rush for 3 or 4 or 5 small little chunks that over time and buy time. Because ultimately, as good as the NFL defensive backs are, it's almost impossible to ask these guys to cover for 5 or 6 seconds. So if you're able to buy that couple extra seconds of time with your legs, you're going to end up putting stress on a defense. And no matter how good that defense is, ultimately it's going to cause problems for them. And that's something that, 49ers fans probably can remember when Seattle had that all-time great defense. Kaepernick gave them fits because he had a big arm. They couldn't stack the box. They had a hard time spying him because the guy was so big and he was so fast that he could, hurt teams with his legs. And that was one of the better defenses I've ever seen. And even then they had their issues with a guy who's mobile that had that big arm. So long story short, if they can get somewhere in that range, the pocket presence thing, I'm saying to the comment, pocket presence is great, but realistically right now, who among the league's best quarterbacks really has that pocket presence without the mobility? And that's the key. Having both is a tremendous luxury. Yes,
exactly. And that's why, I've been saying a lot that Justin Fields could be a bust if he can't use that mobile ability. And the pocket presence for Justin Fields, in my opinion, is not that good. The mobility is why he's being drafted so high and projected to go so high in this draft. So, yeah, for sure. But pocket presence, you kind of say right there, pocket presence. You definitely need to have pocket presence. But you also got to have some mobility as well. The league keeps changing every day. Like you said, we're all humans. We all evolve just like that. So it's going to be, you're going to see a lot. You're going to see a trend. And that's why, guys, you see guys like Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, all be ranked so highly now. And that mobility is someone that every team wants because you see the league evolving. So, yeah, for sure. I'm totally with you on that. So.
And if you look at guys at the top, like for me, everybody's subjective, but for me, it's pretty clear, cut and dry. The 3 best quarterbacks in the league, whatever order you may have them today, is Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and Patrick Mahomes. All 3 guys are mobile, but they also have the pocket awareness to move the pocket, to escape, to be a little bit more mobile. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. They can throw from the pocket if they need to, but even Aaron Rodgers, I believe he's 37, 36 now, something like that. He still has the mobility to extend plays and get out of the pocket and throw on the run and do all these things, which is what modern offenses are kind of asking guys to do. And as good as defenses are nowadays, they have trouble containing kind of. You still have your Bradys and Breezes, guys who aren't really going to beat you with their legs, but are going to beat you mentally and are able to pick apart a defense from the pocket. But that's becoming an obsolete thing in this league, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, the NFL is very cyclical. So basically, like pocket presence, while it's great, it's not as important as I think it may have been 10 or 15 years ago. If you have a guy that can be confident within the pocket and work within the structure of an offense, but also add the mobility, that's just as good to me as having a guy who's just a stud from the pocket but isn't going to extend plays. And 10, Definitely. 15 years from now, maybe it'll go back to where those Breezes and those, people like somebody like a Peyton Manning is, the prototype for what you look for in a quarterback, So it's all cyclical and it's all relevant. But yeah, ideally you'd have both.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as Kobe says right here, I mean, you need a QB who can use not all. I mean, I know I like all of the line behind the line of scrimmage, but like all. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely right. You gotta use all of it, not just pocket presence. It's definitely more than just that. And like, just I mean, as you said, like obviously being a team mentally, that's kind of being a bit obsolete. You got guys like Breeze going out, but that's how they succeed because they were able to read defenses behind the line of scrimmage. So. I mean, that's exactly what you're looking for in your quarterback right there. And I mean, we've been talking about offensive line a little bit. Offensive line, massive part in that. Even I know you're saying like Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, they've been succeeding even without offensive line by scrambling. And definitely the quarterback has a massive part to do with how good an offensive line looks. But I mean, when you got a guy like Garoppolo, or if you want to bring a guy like, as I made a video on, Sam Darnold, that's when you got to have that offensive line secured. And then you can really work with a lot of guys. But yeah, I definitely think, I mean, offensive line, I said it was probably the biggest need in my opinion. And it really depends on who your guy is. Like if you bring a guy like Zach Wilson, offensive line might not be as important as another position like defensive back now if you got Zach Wilson. But if you keep Garoppolo, well, first of all, you kept your quarterback. You got there. Offensive line is the biggest need. So it really depends on who your quarterback is for the next season. So yeah, for sure. But yeah, for sure. All right, let's finish up the offense. Let's just combine wide receiver and tight end into one position, kind of more like the receiving game. I know we talked about the tight end presence in the running game a little bit, talked about that with running backs. Let's just talk about the receiving game. And I definitely think there are a lot of takeaways from this, mainly at the receiver position. But I mean, first one, let's just get this out the way. Brandon Aiyuk is special. I really don't need to go into that really as much. But kid's special. He's going to, I mean, Lynch nailed the pick. Shanahan Lynch nailed that pick. I don't really need to say anymore. So, yeah. All right. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk's comparison going into the draft. Even though I believe that Brandon Aiyuk is probably going to be the better receiver on this team, when you look at importance on this team, it's Deebo Samuel because he does, I mean, as you saw this year, he's a lot more in the run game than we thought he would do. I thought going into the year, this is why I said, like, we need to bring another receiver. We need to get a guy at 13 last year because Deebo Samuel is not going to be a wide receiver one. And a lot of people disagree with me. He's like, oh, they need him to be that wide receiver one, catch the balls. They want to do a lot more than just catch the balls. And you saw it when he was on the field, he looked so good. I mean, he looked so good and the team looked so good, I should say. But I mean, and you saw the importance, especially in the Washington game. I know on my pregame stream, I had Vish on. He was talking about how Deebo Samuel, the most important part of the team. We were both agreeing that with no kill, he's definitely one of the most important parts of this team. And then goes down, and then the game plan just gets messed up, just like that. I mean, there's a massive game plan surrounding Deebo Samuel. And when he's on the field, this team is a whole lot better. You saw it last year. You saw it this year. So Deebo Samuel is the most important piece to this offense. George Kittle, I don't know if I think George Kittle is a very close number 2 because, I mean, he opens up the run game. They do have a lot in the pass game, but for tight ends with George Kittle. But that's going to be my next point right there. And that's kind of just having a second receiving tight end is going to be crucial to this team. Whether it's Jordan Reed, whether you bring in another guy. I haven't looked at the tight end free agents. One guy that does stand out that we were rumored to get last year, maybe David Njoku could be a guy you bring in for that receiving ability, or even Evan Engram. I don't know how much teams are going to pay him, considering he made a Pro Bowl. But I think those are two guys you could bring in that just come off the top of my head if you don't want to bring Jordan Reed back. But when Jordan Reed was on the field, and especially when Kittle was out, he played a massive part in this offense. And I definitely think it deteriorated with the play of the backup quarterbacks. I mean, you saw it with Mullins. The connection really wasn't there with Jordan Reed. And once that happened, he really started to lose a lot of that play time that he had earlier, and they mainly used Dwelley a lot, which I definitely think Dwelley is another important piece of the team, especially when Kittle's out. But you got to have a guy who can be a receiving tight end, does not need to do much in the blocking game, just be a guy who can catch the passes whenever needed. And that's going to be a crucial part to this team we didn't see in the years prior. Now we saw it this year with Jordan Reed, and they got to continue that if they want to make a Super Bowl run.
Yeah, I think they made a run at Austin Hooper, who ended up getting, I think, like a $10 million. And
he's like third highest paid tight end in the league right now, which is kind of crazy. But
they made a run at him. Kyle clearly had some plans where he was willing to invest serious resources to have 2 tight ends on the field. Hate to say too, if somebody like myself or anybody else wants to pick at the availability for Jimmy Garoppolo, you kind of have to do the same for George Kittle, because George Kittle's missed time.
Exactly.
I know he's a very tough guy. I think that he wants to play even when he is hurt. So I'm not questioning his toughness in the slightest. I'm just saying, just from a fairness and objective standpoint, he's kind of, I don't know if I'm ready to call him injury prone yet, but I think his play style definitely leaves him susceptible to be injured more frequently maybe than somebody who isn't playing with that same physicality that we all love, which is part of the reason why we do, love George Kittle and support the guy.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Much. But
and also, I know we talk a lot. I know Niners fans just love George Kittle and just praise him as the next Lord and Savior, which I do believe that Kittle is probably the best tight end in football. He's right there with Kelce. They're right in the same tier. Maybe put Kelce a bit above. I don't know, but they're right there. But I mean, you look at his year this year, the receiving game was definitely underwhelming. And I will say, and nobody talks about this, Kittle had a drop problem this year. Nobody wants to admit it. I'll admit it. Kittle had a drop problem this year, and he's got to fix that for next season. And that's another reason why having that second receiving tight end is going to be crucial to this team, because I mean, if he's not stepping it up, I know that Shanahan's not afraid to pull that trigger, put him in that blocking game, use him as that blocking tight end, because he is definitely an elite blocking tight end right there, and have that second guy, your tight end 2, be the receiving tight end if George Kittle doesn't fix his drop problem. But we have to admit it, that George Kittle has a drop problem, and I'll be the first to say it.
Yeah, and I think a big thing to remember with Kittle too is that I'm not going to point out my issues with the quarterback play and then act like the receivers don't struggle because of it. But the problem with Kittle I've noticed is that like yesterday, he made that fantastic one-handed catch, which was, probably one of the better plays all year that I've seen. Is phenomenal.
Exactly.
He also dropped a couple balls that I don't think he really should have. I mean, I know a lot of people don't think it's a popular block like a tackle season with his lack of availability, and seeing those drops over and over again. I have to give the nod to Kelce, and it's something where I think Kittle's right there.
Yeah,
behind
I would not be afraid to do that as well, but it's definitely close.
Yeah, it's very close, and I think that if you put Kittle on the team, he wouldn't look as good as he does here. Just like if you put Kelce in the 49ers, he wouldn't look as good as he does in Kansas City. So they're both perfect for what they do. But I don't think Kelce drops those balls at the rate that Kittle ends up dropping a lot of them. And again, it's such a small thing to nitpick. But I think getting him some help would be good. Getting some sort of second option there would be something that I think will help this team tremendously. I like Dwelley a lot. I think that he doesn't get as many chances as he maybe should, given that the fact he's not the fastest guy. I get it. He's not running the greatest routes. He's not the strongest guy, but he has great hands. The guy how often do you see Ross Dwelley drop catchable balls? You almost never do.
You don't see him that often.
Pretty sure-handed, and he's cheap as hell. He's a restricted free agent, and he's making $750,000 this year. He's probably
not to mention. I mean, when Kittle was out, his role in the blocking game increased, and he performed exactly how he should have in the blocking game. I know it's not yes, you have lower expectations for a guy like Ross Dwelley than you do George Kittle. But from what Ross Dwelley was doing, he was doing pretty well, knowing who Ross Dwelley is. So, yeah, I definitely think that I do like when they have that receiving guy and use Dwelley more in that blocking role, because I don't think they like to target Dwelley. I don't know what it is, but the game plan doesn't really revolve around him. They just have him in. If they want a guy who can block, they're not going to really use him in those passing situations. You'd rather get a guy who can catch those passes a bit more, have a better likelihood of doing it. And even though I will give credit to Ross Dwelley for being a good receiving tight end, I think Shanahan's going to want someone a bit better. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be good. And then also in the draft, I think it's time that they start looking at upgrading the receiver position behind Debo and Ayuk. Look at a team like, I'm not saying that they should try to be the Chiefs, because the Chiefs are a very unique offense. They're a great talent, but they also have options and they have depth. They have obviously Tyreek Hill, they have Travis Kelce. Those are the kind of the top of the pecking order for them. So those guys are going to get the lion's share of the targets. But they also have Sammy Watkins, and Sammy Watkins isn't, as good as he may have been a few years ago. He may not be as great. He obviously isn't as good as we all think. He was one of the best college prospects I've ever seen. He didn't live up to the hype. He's a dependable receiver that when you put in a third, fourth option, he can get the job done. Mecole Hardman, burning speed, takes top off a defense, makes it hard to focus all your resources on a Travis Kelce, on a Tyreek Hill. And I think that this draft is so deep that there's so many guys that they can look at where they can
they're already throwing out names in the chat. Chris Olave. I think I like Jalen Waddle a bit better. I think he would be probably the better fit. Another guy in free agency, I'll say, I've been saying it for a while, especially if Jalen Hurd is not healthy, why don't you just go out there and get a guy like Mike Williams? Because I think that Mike Williams, if they brought him into the system, he could play that Jalen Hurd role, but that they've been waiting on for 2 years. I mean, you got the hands, you got the size. I mean, it's gonna be that big red zone target. You got you got a lot of. I don't know about the versatility too much. They might have to test that out. That's probably the biggest question mark. But for what they're looking for in a guy like Jalen Hurd, I definitely think you can bring in Mike Williams. So yeah, definitely someone like that. I definitely think you can bring in a guy like Mike Williams. There's probably someone in the draft that I haven't even heard of yet that is like a Jalen Hurd that they would probably target instead of Mike Williams, but we'll have to see how it goes. We'll have to see how the draft pans out. So yeah, for sure. But I definitely think I'm definitely with you that you definitely have to upgrade that receiving core a little bit, especially two places stand out. Slot receiver for one, and this is where I'm kind of getting this is one of my biggest letdowns of the season. Trenton Taylor. I mean, the dude just did not perform, in my opinion, when he needed to. Not at all. And there were massive expectations for him. So yeah, for sure. Curtis Samuel, another guy you can target, especially if you want like three guys like Debo Samuel, like Brandon Ayuk, you bring in Curtis Samuel. I think that would just be a matchup nightmare. I don't know if they would do it, but we'll have to see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, as they're just throwing out a ton of receiver names in the chat. So yeah, another guy who definitely let you down, Dante Pettis. Obviously, we had high expectations for him last year. They were a bit lower this year, but we definitely had a lot of guys. I mean, we definitely still had high expectations. Lynch said, oh, this dude looks a lot better. And instead he gets cut. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens with receivers next year. But I definitely think a wide receiver depth could be another big piece. I know we saw Richie James improve a lot. I don't know what his situation is, if they're going to move on for him, but I definitely think you could bring back Richie James. Kendrick Bourne's obviously a free agent. Do you bring him back? He said he wanted to come back. I don't know if they will bring him back, but receiver depth could be a very interesting option this year. Maybe second round. I know Antonio's throwing out Chris Olave. I think Olave could be a first-round pick. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens, but yeah, for sure. You got anything else on the receiving game that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just think that, I like Curtis Samuel sounds nice. Olave is nice. He might be around 2 pick. Waddle, all these guys. The top of the draft is loaded. Obviously love 49ers, but I love the sport of football. I played dynasty football with Devy players too in deep leagues. There's a lot of guys that I've been watching for a couple of years. So for me, guys like Rashad Bateman, my personal favorite. Yeah. Rondale Moore is my personal favorite. I think Rondale Moore in this offense.
Yeah, all the tweets about that hashtag 49ers fans love Rondale Moore, whatever that is. I've seen that a lot.
Rondale Moore, yeah. Like guys like that, Waddle, like I would love them. I have a hard time seeing the way that this team is picked, them picking a receiver at 12, if that's where they stand. And ultimately, for me, it comes back to the quarterback play. Unless if they traded and they got somebody like Stafford who has better arm talent, then hey, go get a receiver at 12. Let's go score 35 points.
Yeah.
So you have Warner. You have these guys that are that can hold it down. You figure everything else out later. I'm cool with it. But this draft is so deep, and I think that that Shanahan values versatility so much. Part of the reason that I think Ayuk is so special is because he can line up outside. He can line up in the slot. He can run that fly sweep. He can run that motion pre-snap. And I think if they had another receiver like that, then it would cause fits for the defense, because all of a sudden now you have three guys who can line up at all three positions, who can run those sweeps, those reverses, those, like I said, those that pre-snap motion, which is such a big part of Kyle's offense. So for me personally, some guys that, for anybody watching, I'd tell you to keep an eye on. Daz Newsome out of North Carolina is number one on my list. I think he would be a perfect fit. He also returns punts. He's a great punt returner. He's somebody that they could have as that third kind of, fourth, maybe if you include Kittle, option in the passing game, but also would be a tremendous upgrade at punt returner, where you're not going to have a guy fair catching without a defender within 15 yards of him, or dropping the ball, or all these things, all these issues we've seen in the punt return game. And then another is Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss. And the reason why I like both of these guys is that you could probably get them later in the draft. Those guys probably are going third, fourth round, just due to how deep this wide receiver class is.
Another guy I want to bring up, or you finish what you're saying, I'll talk about it later.
I was going to say, there's the past two receiver classes have been phenomenal. We had Debo, A.J. Brown, DK, Terry McLaurin, and then this year we're seeing Ayuk, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. I think this coming up class is better than the last two, and it's so deep that you could get a guy that's a stud later in the draft, whereas you might not be able to get a stud at cornerback, or you might not be able to get a stud at edge rusher, or one of these other premium positions the 49ers are kind of looking for help at. So as nice as it would be to envision a Jalen Waddle or somebody like that in the offense, like I said, if they drafted Rondale Moore, I don't care who's quarterback. You could be the quarterback, Sam, and I'd be stoked. You're not good, but I'd be stoked just because I love the guy. But I wouldn't invest that kind of capital into another receiver if it's the same quarterback, because we've seen what the offense is, and it's minimizing the talents of the players they already have. So I wouldn't put another receiver that you're just going to have to game plan around because of the quarterback. All three quarterbacks on the roster have their deficiencies. So I would recommend, like I said, I'd recommend looking at those guys. Tutu Atwell out of Louisville is another guy I like.
Another guy, I'll bring him up right now, Marquez Stevenson out of Houston. That's a guy I've seen high on some draft boards, low on others, but probably like a fourth, fifth round pick. That's another guy you could see go. But you got any other guys you were talking about?
Yeah, I was going to say Sage Surratt out of Wake Forest and Tylan Wallace at Oklahoma State. I think those are way more realistic. If they were to go early, I do like Amon-Ra St. Brown out of USC. I think that he's falling somewhere around where drafted last year, probably between that 35 to 45 range. I think he's a guy who has day one talent, but there's so many good receivers at the top with Chase and Bateman and Waddle and Devonta Smith, Moore, all these guys, that he might slide to that second round, but on another year, he could easily be a first round pick. So it'll be interesting to see what the 49ers do, but there's such an abundance of talent at wide receiver that their options, in my opinion, are far more open to kind of waiting. Like last year we saw, they took Kinlaw at 13 because as much as they, I know Kyle came out and said he had CeeDee Lamb and Ayuk basically 1A, 1B. Those were his guys. He thought they were both relatively in the same tier, but he knew that he could get Ayuk probably on that back end of the round. He didn't see a defensive tackle that he thought was at Kinlaw's level. So they opted to go later in the draft with the position that had more depth. So I could see them doing the same thing with receiver this year just because of how deep the position is.
Exactly, for sure. And I mean, I don't think they're going to go that high. I don't think I would see them do that. I mean, you got Ayuk, you got Deebo Samuel as your 1-2 punch right there. Maybe, Kendrick Bourne could be the other three. You could see Jalen Hurd come back, be that number 3 for us. There's definitely a lot of guys at our receiving position currently that you can bring back and play next year. There's also a lot of free agents. I don't know what we're going to do in free agency with receivers, but I definitely think a guy who can return punts, because that's the one thing I definitely want to see. A guy, punt returner, in my opinion, was one of the biggest needs on this team. Kick returner, I don't get why they stopped Richie James doing the kick returns, because frankly, I liked him at kick returns. Punt returns, I did not like any of the guys that they played at punt return. Maybe use Ayuk a bit more. I don't know, but we'll have to see what happens with the receiving core. So, yeah, for sure. You got anything else about receivers or receiving game?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. All right. That sounds good. All right. We are over an hour in. Jordan, you got time for a bit more? Or do you want to do a part 2 on defense? Split it up to you. What do you think? What you think right now?
I got a little bit of time. I go for a little bit more.
All right, that sounds good. So let's start. I'm seeing a lot of Patrick Surtain, Witherspoon, Verrett comments. Let's just start off with cornerbacks right now. And I think this is an interesting position because, in my opinion, I would say that cornerback was a massive plus in this year. I definitely think we improved the cornerback play, even with and I know the defensive line was depleted as hell, but the cornerback play improved, even with the defensive line play just not doing well. And I think it really comes down to two guys. First of all, Jason Verrett. And I'll just say right now, Jason Verrett is back. Obviously, I think I tweeted out last year, worst tenure 49er I've seen. Obviously, it was 2 plays. Didn't make my fucking awful 5 list, but because it was 2 plays. But Jason Verrett is back. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see what they do this offseason. I think minimum, you're paying him $8 million a year. Maximum is probably around the 10 to 12 range, something around there. But, with all that Jason Verrett has been through, he's going to want a lot of money. So I don't know necessarily if they are bringing him back. But with Sherman probably out the door, I definitely think that's going to be another very important guy to sign on the defensive side of the ball, Jason Verrett. And he's back. Hopefully he can stay healthy next year. I think you're looking he's looking at a guy who can be consistently good when healthy. So I definitely hope that Jason Verrett can be back next year as our CB1 or CB2, depending on what we do in the draft. And the draft, it's going to be very interesting to see what we do. As Antonio says right here, I keep saying that Lynch doesn't draft cornerbacks and he's not expecting that. It's going to be interesting. I feel like cornerback is our biggest defensive need on this team. So are they going to draft a cornerback? I don't know. I don't know when it's going to be. You could see, I think if there's any year that a cornerback would go first round for the Niners, it's probably this year. But I don't know if it's going to happen. Probably won't because they like to build in the trenches. I do think edge could be that's obviously another big need for the Niners. So they might address edge ahead of cornerback. So we'll see what happens. But there's definitely a lot of question marks in cornerback going into the offseason. But Jason Verrett is not a question mark if he returns. Same with Ahkello Witherspoon. Ahkello Witherspoon got out of the doghouse. He was in the doghouse early in the year. He got out of it. And I definitely think he's here to stay. After that, he proved Shanahan wrong, worked his ass off to get out of the doghouse, which doesn't happen to many people, got out and balled out. And I definitely think they're going to bring Ahkello Witherspoon back, especially with the play at the end of last year. Again, there's the inconsistency. I don't really know how that's going to be this year. Next year, I should say, if he's going to be inconsistent. But Witherspoon looks a lot better. And I'm glad to see that because I definitely think we needed him right there. So, yeah. And those are my takeaways for cornerback right there. You got anything to add on to that?
Just pay Verrett. Sherman's probably gone. Thanks for coming. Impeccable IQ. I think his talent obviously was impacted by that Achilles tear he suffered before he came here. Didn't have the same burst, wasn't the same guy in man, but, he helped lead that defense. And, I'm grateful for his time here. I definitely think that it was quite the surprising after the villain that he kind of was for a long time. Oh, my God.
Hands down, Richard Sherman was the most hated. I'm obviously pretty young, but from 5th to, I don't know, from his tenure on the Seahawks, he was the guy I hated the most by far out of all the sports. You can throw out a lot of other names about guys that I hate, but Richard Sherman, by far, a tier of his own on most hated guys. And we bring him in, does a pretty good job. Also, I wouldn't say it's elite, but does a phenomenal job here. I'm gonna thank him more for the locker room help. The locker room, he brought that culture in. He definitely I definitely think if this team did not have Richard Sherman, we would not be where we are today. Richard Sherman was crucial to bring in, led this team, was a leader throughout this entire team. So, there's nothing you can do but thank him for his time here. But there's obviously a lot of guys there's obviously a lot of teams, I should say, that are going to sign him somewhere else. So he's probably gone, but it is what it is. So, yeah. All right, continue what you were saying.
So he's gone. Verrett,
you just froze. I don't know. I don't know if you can still hear me, but you just froze right there.
Can you hear me now? I was a big fan of his coming out. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. You just froze for a little bit.
I was a big fan of his coming out of TCU. He obviously had the Pro Bowl season early on with the Chargers. I think after all the injuries and the adversity he faced, it's nice to see that he's bounced back and he is now playing at that level we all thought that he could early on. So I would pay him. I would feel comfortable giving him somewhere around a 2-year, $17 million deal, something in that range.
Yeah, definitely.
More than fair. I would bring back Mosley. I'm a big fan of E-Man. I think that a lot of the time he ended up the 49ers, he ended up covering a larger portion of the field than Sherman did in that zone they were sitting in, and a lot of times teams picked on that, so his numbers may not have looked as good. But I think for the price that he would probably command, they're going to get better value out of him. Maybe they draft a couple guys. I was really big on Tim Harris when they drafted him out of Virginia. Haven't seen anything since he's with the few reps that he has gotten this year and the few snaps that he has gotten this year. That makes me say that I'd feel great about him coming back in a big role. I'm happy Witherspoon had a couple good games on his way out, but I've been out on Witherspoon since halfway through 2018. I just felt like he didn't really have it, and I thought that he's somebody who has tremendous physical gifts, but too many mental lapses, and just somebody that I personally I don't want. No offense, I don't want on the team anymore. If he can get paid somewhere else to go start, I wish him nothing but the best.
I mean, I wouldn't be mad if we didn't bring him back, but I definitely think considering that he was in the doghouse and got out, I definitely think that's something that Lynch and Shanahan, and I'm just gonna say I think DeMeco Ryans is probably going to be our next defensive coordinator. That's something that he probably appreciated as well. So whoever our next defensive coordinator, and I think it's going to be in-house. They probably saw Witherspoon, and I think they're going to want to bring him back. Is he going to start at cornerback 2? Probably not, but I definitely think he's going to be a good depth piece if we bring back to this team.
Yeah, I don't see it personally. I think that
Yeah, I think you're with a lot of other fans on that too. So I think Witherspoon's a guy you either love him or you hate him. It's that simple as that. There's nothing in the middle.
Yeah, so. And I just, again, if he came back as a depth piece, it's cool. I respect the hell out of Spoon, especially last year. I flew to Seattle for that game. I was there when he was getting picked on by Metcalf. I was concerned even just watching from the stands. They obviously made
definitely.
I believe Saleh was the one that did. It wasn't the Kyle decision. It was a solid decision. Put E-Man out there. Witherspoon came out during that game and during the Vikings game, offered to take over Emmanuel's role on special teams. He didn't sit there and pout. He didn't, reluctantly, he'd like to think anybody would if they were asked, but he went to the coaches and he said, hey, what can I do to still contribute, even though I've been taken from the starting role that I had? So I have tremendous respect for that. There's not as much as we'd like an athlete would do that. They all don't do that. So I respect the hell out of him for doing that. I'd like to see him get a fresh start somewhere. Again, I don't want to see it on my team. As messed up as that sounds, I don't want to see it for the team that I love.
Yeah.
Maybe Saleh still likes him. He takes him with him to wherever hopefully he ends up as a head coach, because we all know he deserves it. But absolutely. I'm out. The biggest question for me is K'Waun Williams, because K'Waun Williams has proven to be.
I was about to bring that up too.
He's a premier slot corner, and I think that he's at the point where he's going to command a good deal of money. I would have felt better moving on from him before Jamar Taylor suffered his ACL injury. Without Jamar Taylor, it becomes a little bit murky for me, because now you're going to have to navigate that free agent market. You're going to have to look through the draft and all these other avenues to replace a guy. And you're not going to be able to replace a guy because K'Waun is so good at rushing off the edge, at playing in that slot, sticking in man coverage, playing zone, all the things that he's asked to do, he excels at. So I'd have a tough time moving on from him. I would pay him and Verrett, definitely. The only other defensive back that really I have concerns about is Tartt, because I personally like Tartt a lot. I think that he's not flashy, so he may not get the love that he deserves, but he's generally in the right spot. Generally doesn't blow coverages, and he generally doesn't miss tackles. And again, he may not be making plays. He may not be getting a bunch of picks. He may not be doing all these things that stand out to people watching highlights. When you watch the film consistently, the guy's doing what he's asked, and he's doing a good job of it. And I would rather have the consistency of having a guy doing that than take a chance with somebody else. I know they trotted high on coming out of Southern Miss. I thought he had that ball hawking ability that they may have lacked within the secondary. They had him and Jimmy Ward out together, and Ward kind of slid to that box safety, strong safety position Tart kind of plays. It all depends on money for me, and I know you can apply that to anything. You can say that about anything.
Yeah.
If it's a small difference and it's just it's a feasible gap that they could handle with Tart walking or him staying, I would pay that difference and I would feel good about it. Just because my only concern with him is kind of durability. He's also has had his injury issues, but when he's on the field, he is a tremendous difference maker, and we saw it last year. There were the huge splits when he didn't play that last month and a half or so of the season before the playoffs. So I would bring Tart. To me, the three guys you can't let go are Tart, K1, and Verrett. And if it was two of the three, I'd probably keep Tart and I'd keep Verrett, honestly, just because I think it's so hard to I like Tarvarius Moore a lot, but I wouldn't feel great about just committing to him. There's a lot of stuff that I think there's left to be desired. I think that he's blown too many coverages and he's taken some bad angles to ball carriers that have led to big plays. Obviously stuff that can be worked on and improved on, but I would rather take the consistency of a Verrett and a Tart and then try and figure out the slot corner position maybe elsewhere.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting because I personally think that Tart's out the door, and I don't think the Niners are going to do much to bring him back. I think that, I would say I definitely have a bit of bias for Tarvarius Moore, but when the Niners brought him in, they want to move him to free safety to take over Jimmy Ward's spot. Obviously, Jimmy Ward proven wrong. That sent him back a little bit. And then they moved Tart to strong safety, keep Moore at free safety. And it's a decent duo, not as good as Tart and Ward, but again, as you say, it's a money thing. And I do think that Tart, I don't know how much he's going to be asking for with all the injury history and everything, but as you like to say, availability is the best ability. And I think that's definitely a massive concern with the 49ers and Jaquiski Tartt. Obviously, he's missed a lot of games throughout this season and last season as well. So I definitely think they could move on from him. I personally, I definitely think you definitely have to bring back Verrett. K1, on the other hand, you probably do bring it back, especially with the Jamar Taylor ACL tear. There's not that many guys who are going to play nickelback at the level that K1 Williams does. And I know that I had this discussion with Callie, if you're watching. I mean, you were saying that, he's hands down the most important guy to bring back, which I disagree with, but I see that point as well. He is one of the most important guys to bring back on this team. Definitely top 5, in my opinion, to bring back. So I definitely think K1 Williams should bring back. We definitely have to bring back this season. But safety is going to be the biggest concern. Not the biggest concern, but another big question mark of this offseason. You got Ward at one spot. Who you got at the other spot? You can go with Tart. You can go with Moore. Probably won't go with Harris, or you can bring another guy in, draft another guy. We'll have to see. If you're going to the draft, the safety class is not that deep. So I think you'd probably have to, I don't know where they would take a safety in the draft. Again, Lynch doesn't really like to go secondary. He's gone safety a bit more than he has cornerback. But I think if you're moving on from Tart, I think you probably bring in a guy from free agency to replace him, someone who can do what he does. Maybe a little bit less, but guy who has a little bit more room to improve. I don't know. I think Tart could be out the door, though, which is unfortunate. On the other hand, though, I've heard people within the organization and within and just who know him personally that said he's one of the smartest guys that they know on and off the field. So that could be a massive factor for the 49ers to bring him back. But Tart in the rest of the safety position is going to be that biggest question. Who's playing? One of the biggest questions, I should say, who's playing next to Jimmy Ward next season? And I definitely think it's definitely a massive wild card because you didn't really see, obviously Tart's the best out of those guys, but other than that, you didn't really see a guy who stands out to you as that guy. So maybe you move on from Tart, maybe bring a guy, maybe you stick with more. I don't know. It's going to be a massive question this offseason for sure. You got anything else on the secondary?
No, I think the secondary, honestly, really is kind of on their – everybody's making a big deal. They don't have cornerback signed. They'll figure that stuff out. They're going to bring back –
Yeah, Lynch always gets that done. We'll figure it out. But
– it all, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move. I know we're talking about position that Lynch doesn't care about that much. Let's move on to the position that Lynch probably cares about the most, defensive line. And I think the big takeaway from this offseason is – I have two big takeaways. First of all, one's more of a question. I'll ask you this right now. Do we re-sign Kerry Hyder? Yes or no?
I think the question, I think they'd like to, yeah. I mean, ideally, yeah, you definitely bring him back. But I think the question more falls into, can they afford to re-sign Kerry Hyder with everybody else they're going to have to pay? All the other deals are going to have to work out. Hyder played tremendously this year, and it's not something where you can point to and just go, oh, he was only successful because of Bosa and Ford and all these other guys. Like, no, he was successful because he was successful. He was out there. No
balling
offense.
Out week in, week out.
Deion Jordan on the outside for a lot of those. He had Jordan Willis. He had, guys that aren't really world beaters on the opposite end of him, and he was still winning and getting to the quarterback consistently. So I would not be surprised in the slightest to see him go. Like I said, hypothetically, if Saleh goes to Detroit, I could see him bringing Coach K with him. Coach K being the D-line coach and having the ties to Hyder, which probably is a big reason he came and signed for the price he did in the first place.
Exactly.
I would be surprised to see him go, especially to a team with people he's familiar with. He has familiarity there. I'd like to see it. I'm more interested, honestly, to see what they do with Jordan Willis. They gave a 6th-round pick to the Jets for him. He was a 3rd-round pick coming out a couple years ago. Had tremendous athletic upside, but didn't really have the technique down. But he flashed at a couple times this year. He showed that he can get pressure off that edge, and I think he's not really going to command very much money. He's probably coming in on a 1-year prove-it deal for maybe $850K, $900K. I don't see him getting more than $1 million a year.
Yeah, something like that.
It's somebody that they might get that production they got out of Hyder, where they got tremendous value from a player. So I would like to see that. That's the one I'm watching the most.
Yeah, I think Jordan Willis, that's definitely an interesting one you talk about right there. Because, and this kind of goes back to Hyder, you got guys like Deion Jordan, Jordan Willis, who, although they didn't perform like Kerry Hyder, I can definitely see them doing that role, especially when a guy like Bosa is going to come back. And maybe Dee Ford, I don't know. We'll have to see. I think Dee Ford is going to have a massive role in what they do with Hyder. Do they throw the money at him? I don't know. And that kind of leads me to the next point with Arik Armstead. In my opinion, Arik Armstead is a number 3 guy, not number 2, number 3. And you saw it this year without Bosa. Armstead was just a shell of himself. And I think that's just what his role is. I know he got a lot of hate this year. He's like, oh, Arik Armstead is bad. Next year, that's just going to silence everyone. People are going to start saying Arik Armstead's good when he's with Nick Bosa, when he's with maybe Dee Ford. We'll have to see about that. But Arik Armstead is probably your number 2 or 3 guy. I'd probably lean towards number 3. That's what he was with Ford and Bosa. That's how he performed when both of them were on the field. So that's where you're probably looking at right there. And that kind of goes back to Kerry Hyder. Like, do you want him to be the number 2 guy ahead of Arik Armstead? If so, you probably pay him a lot of money. If you think Arik Armstead is going to be the number 2 guy, or if Dee Ford's back, I should say, then you probably move on from Kerry Hyder. Again, it's kind of a money game, as you said. So, yeah, we'll have to see right there with Kerry Hyder. Kerry Hyder's probably going to be one of the biggest question marks. And as Antonio said, Lynch said Ford's probably gone. That's going to have a massive role, not only in Hyder signing, but Deion Jordan, Jordan Willis. Are they going to bring those guys in, or are they going to save the money, get a guy, maybe even draft for what is it, like not the 6th year in a row, but like 5 times out of 6, another defensive edge, an edge rusher in the draft, something like that. Will they do that? I don't know. I definitely think that number 2 position is going to be very interesting to watch. Do they move arms up there, Kerry Hyder, or do they go back to the draft, see what they can do? I think the defensive end class, I've seen a lot of guys on some mock drafts being mocked round 1. On other mock drafts, those same guys are being mocked round 3. So I definitely think there is a lot of talent. It's not as deep as receiver or quarterback, but they could use the draft to fill that position. I think 2 guys to watch. I'll just throw them out right there. Carlos Basham out of Wake Forest. I've seen maybe top 10 picks right there for Carlos Basham. I've also seen 3rd round. So that's one guy right there. Another guy I've seen. Who's the guy? I'm forgetting his name. Out of Penn State. What's his name? There's some guy out of Penn State that I think the Niners. Who?
They're talking about Shaka Toney.
No, it's like Jason or Joseph something. I don't know. Anyways, that's another guy I've seen. Many projections around him. 1st round, 3rd round, you name it. Solomon Thomas, another guy right there. I know Dom says right here, give him another chance. He does have the potential, but I mean, obviously you have the knee. The ACL is definitely concerning. Obviously he hasn't performed like that. I don't know if they're going to bring him back. honestly. They declined his his 5th-year option, excuse me. So I don't really know. We'll have to see what they do with Solomon Thomas. That could be another guy, but I don't think he's going to be that number 2 guy. I think you're looking for a guy. Gregory Rousseau would be another option. I don't think they draft him that high, but knowing Lynch, that could happen. But we'll have to see what happens there. But I definitely think number 2 guy pairing up on the other side with Bosa is going to be a massive, massive question mark this offseason as well. So, yeah, for sure. You got anything else on defensive line?
No, I just think that they're going to, but to be honest, Bosa and Armstead are the guys they're going to have financial commitments to going forward. They obviously have Ford. That's going to be tricky. He's eventually going to get cut. It's just a matter of when.
Exactly.
His injury took over. But they'll figure it out. They have a good rotation. Kinlaw looked good. Kevin Givens had a great year. Daniels looked good at times. Contavious Street wasn't fantastic, but he's a good rotational player. Like, I have no doubt that they can develop the depth there. I don't think they need to take a high pick. If they do go edge early and the player pans out, I'm not going to complain. It's still a premium position. Earlier, I was talking about the 2 most important positions right after a tackle. In my opinion, you do have a pass rusher. A pass rusher would probably be 3rd for me, and you could flip, honestly, 2nd, 2, and 3. I still think quarterback's number 1, but you could have edge at 2, and I would have no problem with it. Edge and left tackle, most important positions after a quarterback. So I think they'll figure it out, but I just don't see them going. Everybody's like, they're just going to draft a defensive lineman again. There's nowhere to put them. Like, ideally, you're going to get Bosa back. They'll figure something out, unless maybe they're sitting at 12 and somebody like Gregory Rousseau falls down, who I've compared favorably. His measurables compare very favorably to Aldon Smith, who's one of my favorite 49ers of all time.
Exactly.
Crazy long. I think his wingspan's like 80-something inches. Like
it's something ridiculous. I think I have seen on some draft experts have had, they're like, oh, Gregory Rousseau has bust written all over him. Some are like, okay, this dude is the next Aldon Smith, as you said. So I need to do a bit more film watching on him. I've mainly focused on quarterbacks and offensive line so far, but obviously with 4 months before the draft, I'll definitely have to focus on defensive line, mainly just going over our needs there, see who fits best. So yeah, for sure. All right, I know you got to get going. Before you get going, how about you just give me 2 grades, 1 for the offense, 1 for the defense, just 2 quick letter grades, what you got for offense and defense?
Offense, I'd go C-. And statistically, if you look at them, it's probably closer to an F. They weren't good. They ranked in the bottom of the league in efficiency. They weren't scoring a lot of points. But when you look at the tape week in and week out, and you look at what the play caller and Kyle Shanahan had to work with, and you look at how devoid they were of skill position players and how much they had to really kind of fight through that stuff, I think that it warrants some praise. And that's why I'd put them, like I said, run a C-, somewhere in that range. It certainly wasn't good. I think that it comes back to so many things, injuries, inconsistent play, etc. But it's better than it looked. If you looked at it statistically and you didn't watch the games, you didn't review the tape, you'd think it was an F. You'd think it was a terrible year.
Yeah, it's a bit better than that. So yeah, so for sure.
And then the defense, I'd go solid A-. The defense, with all the injuries they suffered, all the turnover they had, they lost their best player in the second week. And I don't think it was just the best player on the defense. It was the best player on the entire team, in my opinion, in Nick Bosa. And they lost him. They lost Dee Ford. They had Sherman out for more than half the season. They've lost almost every starter on the defense at a certain point. And week in and week out, they were forcing other teams to have to grind out their points. Even these games where these teams were putting up large point totals, they were having to grind these wins out. And the 49ers finished the year at 5th in total defense, which is incredible when you think about how
it's ridiculous.
How, all the struggles that they had to go through and all the adversity that they faced. They were still, for total defense, 5th in the league. And that, for me, that's incredible. The points per game, they did give up a little bit more points per game. They're around middle of the pack in the league in points per game. I like looking at yardage, though, because points can be such a volatile statistic year to year. A team turns the ball over on their side of the field, and like the Beathard fumble, and Seattle got a touchdown out of it. When the defense is working with a short field like that consistently, it's hard. But when you look at yards, you can really see how well a team is moving against the defense. And again, that like that. And the 49ers have consistently been a top 5 to 7 unit all year when you look at the advanced numbers on the defensive side of the ball. So for me, the saving grace of the team, because the special teams wasn't very good either, the defense was far and away. I don't think I'm breaking any news by saying that. I think everybody's pretty much acutely aware of it. But I think that the appreciation for the job that those players and Robert Saleh did can't be understated because of how good they really were. And you add in the context of all the pieces that they were missing, and they still were a top 5 unit year.
Exactly. And that's why I keep saying I might just share my defense grade. It's very similar to yours. I got B+, but I mean, you look at all the injuries and you look at how well this defense performed. This defense is going to be the best defense in the league next year. I'll just say that right now. I don't think it's even a bold take. I definitely think this defense is going to be the best defense in the league next year. All around, you got a lot of guys all across the board. I mean, your linebacker core is going to be better than it was in 2019. I'll talk about linebackers. I know you got to get going soon, but yeah, I mean, with all the injuries and they performed really well, that's definitely, I'll definitely take that. And next year is going to be a very fun year for this defense. As for offense, I got a C+, kind of similar to yours. I mean, yeah, you look at the tape, it's probably an F, but just knowing like everything, it looks a lot better than it is. I feel like, I mean, the injuries to Kittle and Garoppolo hurt significantly. We definitely saw that those two guys are really going to, were really the driving force of this offense. And Garoppolo, I mean, wasn't even that big of a factor in this offense. But considering how everyone played this year, considering the circumstances, I'm going to give this offense a C+. So a bit higher than you on offense, a bit lower than you on defense. So, yeah, for sure. You got anything else you want to say before you head out?
No, not really. I appreciate you having me on, Sam. Always happy to come on Niner Wire. And,
yeah, for sure, man. I always love having you on, man. Always a lot to share. Guys, make sure to go check him out on Twitter at @splash_cousin. Post a lot of stuff there. Been getting a lot of followers too recently. So hot name in the 49ers Twitter community. Got to make sure to go follow him there. But anyways, Jordan, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Real quick, I'll just add too, I'm doing some statistical analysis for, I don't know if you guys have seen yet on 49ers Twitter or whatnot. There's Javi and Matt are kind of spearheading it. The 49ers Gold Mine, they're starting up. Lot of
49 GM.
They have Hugh and Luke from the Blow the Whistle podcast, Andrew and Jason of the Sprint Ride Option podcast. Steph and Angie are going to be doing their own podcast. I know Marco Martinez and Nate from the Niner Nation podcast is on it too. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a lot of really great stuff from them. So if you haven't followed at 49ers Goldmine, please give them a follow. Check it out. It's got some excited stuff coming. I know the site will be up and running soon, and we're working on some really good stuff that we're excited to share with you guys.
Yeah, man, definitely a lot of exciting stuff there. I definitely think that I like what you guys are doing there. So I really can't wait to see what happens. But yeah, for sure. Make sure to follow 49ers Goldmine there at @splash_cousin on Twitter. You got anything else to say before you head out?
Real quick too, I just realized I forgot about Leo, and Leo is the man. Leo Luna is the managing editor at 49ers Goldmine as well. Fantastic person. I want to make sure I didn't leave them out.
Yeah, for sure. Make sure to follow him too, man. So yeah, for sure. All right, man. Jordan, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Glad to have you on again. And I guess I'll see you next time.
Sounds good, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Take care. All right. So with Jordan gone now, let's talk about the last position we have. We've gone through everything, gone through grades. Let's talk about the linebackers and finish on that note. I don't have too much to say for this other than, first of all, I'll just put it out there. All pro Fred. Nothing needs to be said about that. One of the best linebackers, if not the best linebacker in the league right there. You got a gem in Fred Warner for many years to come down the line. And that, in my opinion, speaking of Fred Warner, definitely, I wouldn't say he's the, I can't say he's the most important free agent to sign because he's not a free agent, but it's like Kittle last year, most important guy you have to get on a new contract. Fred Warner right there. I mean, it's going to be a lot, but it's totally worth it when you're paying a guy like Fred Warner a lot of money. I mean, he is one of the best linebackers in the league. You need to do that. So Fred Warner, all pro Fred, go and lock him up. Next takeaway. Obviously, there was a lot of injury this year. We traded Quan. Greenlaw was out for a bit. And one guy that really stepped into that role, Azeez Al-Shaair, I do believe that Azeez Al-Shaair should be in the starting conversation at linebacker next year. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, linebacker is one of the biggest needs on the team. Personally, it's not. Often we run a nickel set where we have 2 linebackers, which are Warner and Greenlaw, which we'll talk about Greenlaw in a sec. But if you want to run that 3 linebacker set, I believe that Azeez Al-Shaair could be that guy right there. Definitely need to have him in the starting conversation. If you don't want him, draft a guy, sign a guy off the streets, you name it. Just do something with that. But I do believe that Azeez Al-Shaair should be in the starting conversation for the linebacker position next year, linebacker 3. I always get the Sam, Mike, and Will confused, so I'm just going to go LB1, Fred Warner, LB2, Dre Greenlaw, LB3, Azeez Al-Shaair. Last thing about linebacker is, as I said, Dre Greenlaw. I think I said at the beginning of the episode, we'll talk about Greenlaw soon. It is now soon, so let's talk about Dre Greenlaw. And again, this dude is one of the most underrated players in this league, on this team, in fact, I'll say. I mean, the dude just balls out week in, week out. And, I mean, he has been so crucial this year. I definitely think that Dre Greenlaw could be a Pro Bowler soon. So that's really all I have to say for linebacker. But Fred Warner, got to lock him up. There's obviously a lot of other guys we have to lock up. So after what is a very rough season, we'll go into a very interesting offseason. Hopefully get this shit together and hopefully go for the gold, win that Super Bowl. So, yeah, for sure. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the stream. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, make sure to follow me on Twitter right here. Instagram's right there. If you're watching on Periscope on Twitter, subscribe to Niner Wire on YouTube. I have a lot of more content coming on the way. Might do a video next week, but I'm going to do, guys, I'm doing at least one stream or video a week. We'll see how that goes up until August, I should say. After that, my future is a bit uncertain. But up until August, you're going to get one stream or video per week from me. If not, I'll try to double it the next week. But that's my goal. At least one stream or video per week. Come April, we'll have a lot of draft content. There's a lot of stuff going on my channel. You got to make sure to check me out on YouTube. Subscribe there. That's where most of the stuff is. But if you are watching on YouTube, and if you're not following me on Niner Wire Sam or Niner Wire _YT, make sure to follow me on those places. But that's going to do it for the stream. Anyways, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Go Niners.